is Four Color Control, aka Check Pile, versus Bob Huang playing Grixis Shadow. The Grixis Shadow deck ported over from Modern. I think because Bob was testing a bunch with Grixis Shadow, and it's a pretty potent deck. A removal heavy deck like the Check deck might be a tough matchup for it, though.
Yeah, it definitely seems like just the way the hands are lining up that the Fatal Push and the Snapcasters are pretty resilient to Thoughtseize.
Yeah, in fact, Tim's hand is just Thoughtseize proof.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're Bob, what do you take here?
You might have to take the TNN because that's the only card you can't really, the only card you can't really interact with in the whole hand is the TNN. But at the same time, you have a Daze in your hand, so you kind of want Tim to just jam.
Yeah, there's going to be a bit of metagaming here, because if Bob doesn't take True Name, Tim might sniff it out and be like, oh, the only reason for him not to take it is if he has a Daze or a counter for it.
Yeah, exactly. So it seems like Bob is almost priced in to take the TNN here.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of it because those Snapcasters are going to be a huge beating, unfortunately.
Okay, he actually decides to take the push, which also isn't that bad. So, let's say in a couple of turns, Tim decides to try and Snapcaster push a Death Shadow. Bob can just Daze the push, and then that's basically getting rid of the same problem.
So Tim draws a Baleful Strix, which is basically a removal spell plus a card draw spell versus the Shadow deck.
Card seems insane here.
Yeah. No, have you played with the modern version of Shadow at all?
Yeah, I played with the modern version quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, so you can understand how the removal heavy decks were already sort of annoying matchups, and it's definitely going to play out the same here, I think.
Yeah, it definitely seems like Tim's deck is almost naturally advantaged in a matchup like this.
Yeah, especially the Force Snapcaster all removal deck.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
it's an unbelievable beating that I hope Bob makes it out alive, but I don't think it's going to be that easy for him.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a little surprised by the aggressive Wasteland. Is the TNN in hand, and if he just plays lands from Tim, if he just plays lands, he'd be able to cast the Baleful Strix sooner. But I kind of understand it at the same time. Maybe Bob kept a greedy hand, and Tim just wanted to see if the waste would get him.
So deck lists are public, and I think Tim knows Bob only has 13 lands in the deck.
Oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
But at the same time, you're trying to mana screw a deck that has access to a bunch of cantrips, Street Wraiths, Mishra's Baubles.
Yeah, cards that are very efficient, don't cost very much mana.
Well, also just all of the cantrips let you act 18 lands out of whatever.
Yeah, exactly. You find your lands
cantrips
for not having that many lands in the deck.
So Bob still hasn't found the namesake card of the deck, which is Death Shadow. He's certainly digging very hard for it.
Yeah. He's gonna have to find it pretty soon.
Oh, speak of the devil.
Yeah, it's gonna be really good, actually, especially with the Daze. So
yeah,
it seems that Bob might need one more interaction spell to be able to get around Baleful Strix plus Snapcaster Fatal Push. But just having the Daze right now and then having Ponder and Brainstorm next turn could be really good.
Yep. Bob also has one Teamer Battle Rage in his deck, which is sort of a way you can defeat Baleful Strix. You just have to get your guy to 11-11 and then Battle Rage it.
Yeah.
I'm kind of interested that Bob sort of aggro brainstormed, because this is essentially, he played his third land. Remember, a land got wastelanded. So he just brainstormed to get in one extra damage with the Swift Spear.
Yeah, I guess it kind of makes sense, because with his hand, he couldn't really do anything else, right? In this deck, you don't really have the luxury to wait all the time with your brainstorms, where you would in some other decks that are much more value-based. You just had to find what you need. And
This
it
is
turned out pretty well for him.
Yep. This is a much more aggro combo deck than aggro mid-range, I guess is
Yeah, for sure.
what it.
So if you're Bob here, do you just snap off this Baleful or days on this Baleful Strix?
So the problem with that is, I think the turn after, what do you do about either snap push or true name?
Yeah, exactly. So Bob knows pretty much every single card in Tim's hand. He knows the Snapcasters, the TNN, and Tim's drawn basically all lands. So, so he really can't afford to counter that Strix.
I think countering the Strix is just it's really hard to win if you do that, I think.
Yeah.
I think what Bob's going to do is try to build a big Swift Spear and try to bait. Ooh, Lightning Bolt is actually the perfect way to get around that. And Bob also draws a second Shadow.
Yeah, so
that's actually excellent.
What do you put back off of this Brainstorm?
My gut tells me I would put Thoughtseize and Ponder back.
And then just play Bloodstained Mire, play 2 Death Shadows.
Yeah. I think you need the Bolt for the Strix the following turn.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It seems like the Thoughtseize isn't doing very much here for just playing Double Shadow.
It would be playing Double Shadow is insane here. They're both 8/8s.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. It seems like the Thoughtseize doesn't do very much.
Interesting. He put back the Bolt. Oh, because he thinks that this is going to happen. That's why.
I guess that's kind of smart, actually, when you think about it.
Yeah.
Because now you can play Double Shadow, daze something, and then play the Thoughtseize on the following turn.
Yeah, that's pretty good. And these shadows are going to be 8/8s.
Yeah.
What a ludicrous creature.
Yeah, actually, this daze is just gonna be lethal.
Yeah, because you just daze returning a Water Grave, correct?
Yeah, exactly. But luckily, if Tim wants to cast a Snapcaster as opposed to TNN, he'll just be able to get around the daze.
Well, sort of. It's only a holding action. I don't think it actually progresses your game plan very much because what'll happen is it just forces a chump block.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's not like it's going to win him the game, but he's not actually just dead on board.
Oh, interesting. Does Bob have a second Watery Grave?
I'm not sure.
I'll check real quick. He does, but he chose not to fetch it because he doesn't want to get punked out by Bolt, like Snap Bolt.
I guess that makes sense. How many bolts are in Tim's deck?
Tim's deck has 1 Lightning Bolt. I guess he probably would have done it still. But
yeah, that makes sense knowing that he has 2 snaps in hand.
Yeah. Alright, so Tim smartly figuring out that jamming a 3 here probably not the best idea. Because the only way the sequence makes sense is if Bob has days in hand.
Yeah. Basically, there he was looking for exactly push.
Yep.
Doesn't seem like much else could have got him out with the Ponder.
Actually, he could have pondered into Abrupt Decay. There's 1 in his deck.
Yeah, Decay also.
So Bob drew a Bolt. I think that's actually lethal.
Yeah, that's lethal. Well, even without the Bolt, it's lethal, right? Because the Thoughtseize is 16.
Yep. Well, yeah. So we're gonna daze the Snapcaster, probably.
Yep. Then
or we could just let the Snapcaster resolve and just bolt it.
Yeah.
Doesn't really matter what we do.
Yep.
Wow, very impressive show for Bob's deck in this first game, I think.
Yeah, for sure. This is the first that I've actually seen of Death Shadow being played in Legacy, and it looked really strong this game.
Yeah, I think a long time ago, Jerry played Blue-Black Death Shadow, like, right when the card came out.
Yeah.
But that was a long time ago. That was, like, 2011 or something ludicrous.
Yeah.
But that was a sweet game.
Yeah, that was a really cool game.
Alright, so Bob taking out his forces because I don't think he wants to fight an attrition war versus the control deck.
Yeah, you almost never do. I
think his plan is to try to grind. So what he brought in smashes to kill Baleful Strix and deal damage, which is smart. He took out Temur Battle Rage because it's terrible to top deck when your creatures have all been killed.
Yeah, basically just tried to leave in as many cards that he could like get actual play out of as possible.
So Tim also similarly siding out forces, some number of forces, bringing in other explosives, which is an absurd card versus this deck. You play it on one and it kills basically all of their creatures except for Angler and Street Wraith.
Yeah, EE seems very good here. I'm surprised not to see Tim wanting any copies of Pyroblast in this matchup.
So they hit the cantrips and delvers?
Yeah, exactly. It seems like something like Counterspell would be pretty slow, but I guess at the same time, a lot of the time, Bob's not going to be able to play a Death Shadow that early. So Counterspell, while costing 2, will actually be able to counter Death Shadow a lot of the time.
Yep, that seems reasonable. So I think basically Tim decided to side in all of his removal and take out some of her forces and shave one Jace because I can't imagine ever wanting to draw 2 in the matchup.
Yeah.
That just seems like a death knell.
Yeah, Jace can be super slow.
I mean,
I'm surprised to see the Unearth still in the deck, but I guess it pairs pretty nicely with the Strixes.
Yeah. If only Tim had Swords to Plowshares.
Yeah, that card would be perfect.
I think that is one of the reasons you haven't seen a lot of Death Shadow in Legacy. It was quite a poor deck versus any deck that had Tundra in it.
Yeah, but I mean, here you see Tim's deck has 4 push, 2 Abrupt Decay, and 3 Snapcaster. That's a lot of efficient ways to deal with Death Shadow, actually.
Yeah.
A lot more than a lot of decks in Legacy would have.
All right. Let's see. Tim's hand is Wasteland, Tarn. Okay, so here you see the difficulty of playing a 4-color deck.
Yeah.
Basically, you don't really know which land you want to get with that thing until you're... I think you don't use it until you basically are forced to.
Well, yeah, you can't use it, right? What are you going to get?
Right. Well, the issue is, what if Bob plays like a turn 1 guy?
Yeah.
Do you push it?
Well, I suppose you can get a Black Source. Does Tim have a Badlands in his deck?
I'm looking for that now. Tim has a Bayou.
Bayou, no Badlands.
But Scalding Tarn can't get Bayou anyways, so...
Yeah, exactly.
So
you pretty much have to get C, right?
Yeah. If you want to play something on turn 1, which you might not want to.
Yeah.
However, Bob is going to get all of the information he needs, unless if we Flusterstorm this.
Yeah, that'd be pretty aggressive, but I could also see it at the same time.
Alright, so he did get C. So, for reference, the lands in Tim's deck are 2 Wastelands, 2 Volcanics, 3 Seas, a Trop, a Swamp, 2 Islands, and a Bayou. So
Okay.
I don't think there's like any pair of lands that covers all of his colors, like you've seen in other 4-color decks.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the usual pairing was Trop and Badlands because that let you cast Abrupt Decay as well as all of the other spells.
Yeah, well, but at the same time, in Tim's build, when you're playing something like 2 Counterspells main deck, it's hard to play Badlands.
Yeah, but he still has the Bayou and Swamp.
Yeah, I suppose you could argue to cut the basic Swamp for the Badlands.
Yeah, I mean that it's just a head. It's how much do you actually want to hedge versus Blood Moon?
Yeah.
Speaking of Bayou, that
Yeah.
at least lets Tim cast Abrupt Decay.
Yeah, and he can actually EE for 1 here too, or just leave up the Flusterstorm. Both seem like pretty fine options.
All right, nice. So Tim aggro wastelanding. I kind of am a fan of that here. Of course, we know Bob's hand and Tim doesn't.
Yeah.
But if Bob doesn't draw a land, it's going to be...
Yeah,
there are going to be problems.
Yeah, Tim is... Ooh, that's a pretty good line to draw.
Wow.
Tim is so priced into make that play though.
I think so too. Because the Bayou means you have to draw another blue source to cast your True Name anyways. That's
Yeah,
just better to Wasteland Bob. But yeah.
but his hand is actually very good.
So is Bob's hand now, actually. Drawing that Water Grave was clutch.
Yeah, the Water Grave is great here.
Yeah, I approve of using Flusterstorm here. The problem is if you don't use it here, you're basically not going to have a good window to cast it, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, nice. There's the blue source you need for,
The TNN.
yep.
Unfortunately for Tim, Bob just has another Thoughtseize for this TNN.
Yeah, Thoughtseize is one of the best cards in any Shadow deck. And here you can see why. It's just, card's absurd.
Yeah, it's just picking apart Tim's hand, letting Bob pay some life towards the eventual shadows that are going to come out. But the rest of Tim's hand is really good against just the card Death Shadow, like having an EE on 1, having an Abrupt Decay.
Yeah.
He's going to need something to actually win the game with at some point, though. But,
I think Bob is actually rooting to draw Gurmag Angler here.
yeah, that seems like the best possible.
So do you cycle Wraith first? I guess you do.
You might as well get more info before you
Yeah.
cast Thoughtseize.
You
Because
should
no
just
matter
Both
no matter
of
what,
the
you cycle the Wraith.
I think. Yeah, you should just cycle both of them, I think.
Yeah, you have to.
Ooh, a Brainstorm.
Yeah, I think that's a great draw.
So, if Bob brainstorms into a red card, there's no black-red land in his deck to fetch. So, it's sort of interesting sequencing what you're supposed to do here, I think. But he just goes with the Thoughtseize. I think his plan is to cast Brainstorm next turn, if he's making this play.
Yeah, that would make sense. So what, for the rest of his turn, he just plays the Misty and Ships? Yeah,
Yep.
that seems good.
Counterspell.
Ooh, Counterspell is especially a good draw right there because Bob, just the previous turn, had just seen Tim's hand with a Thoughtseize, so
Yep.
it's gonna be a good Counterspell.
Bolt is not exactly what you want here. Do you counterspell this Brainstorm?
It's really tempting. Really tempting. It looks like Tim's going for it. And I don't really blame him.
Yeah, so Tim's deck has so many expensive cards in it that cost 3 or more that I think using your counterspell on anything that's reasonable makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Especially, like, Bob has gone through so many cards, giving him a free shuffle effect could be very bad.
Yep.
Just having multiple live spells in hand.
If Bob could see Tim's hand right now, Bob knows that he wants Gurmag Angler more than anything else.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he knows about, what, 2/3 of it, right? He knows about 1 Decay and 1 EE, so he
Yeah.
is almost assuredly already searching for the Gurm.
And Bob knows that Tim's deck also has no Liliana the Veil and 2 Jace the Mind Sculptor
Yeah.
as other ways of getting around a angler. So here's an interesting question. What do you take here? I actually think you take Abrupt Decay
Just because it's...
because it costs 3 to kill 1 drop.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Just less efficient. Ooh, this is actually an insane draw.
Yeah.
But the days, it's going to be like, do you save this here if you're Tim? Do you actually play around the days? Or do you want to get greedy and like deal 2 damage, bring back TNN for the basically 2-turn clock?
If the issue again is having all these expensive cards in the deck. He does play around days, which I don't fault him for. But if he just drew like a Jace or something, it could have been like slightly awkward.
Yeah, it could have been horrible.
But he did draw one. I think the reason
Second
that you can
days.
slightly wait is that you have no pressure on you.
Yeah, for sure.
But that second days is going to actually be good enough.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty big. But still, Bob needs something pretty soon that, like a Gurm. Only really Gurm.
Only in Gurm, because the issue is if he gets anything else, they just immediately die.
Yeah.
Bob's 13 land deck sort of flooding out, which is kind of absurd, but There are a lot of cantrips, so it probably plays more like an 18 land deck.
I don't understand why Bob didn't double days the K command. It seems like he had to. Like
Yeah, that's a little bit peculiar.
Tim drew a land and Bob it literally can't win the game. Yeah, I think he might have just.
Yeah, that might have been a slight misstep.
Yeah. Oh well, it happens.
It does happen to the best of us.
Certainly.
Well, that was kind of a weird game. Almost nothing. Tim didn't actually do very much except Bob dealt himself so much damage.
Yeah.
That basically he was at 5 before Tim actually did anything, and then died to shock plus attack for 3.
Yeah, it didn't even end up mattering what Tim had.
Yeah.
So it seems like on the draw, he's decided that he wants some number of Power Blasts and Rebs. I think after game 1, Tim realized that, like, if he was fine trading 1-for-1 with the Flusterstorms for whatever spell Bob was trying to cast, then he's pretty fine with having the Pyroblast effect because it's going to counter the Brainstorms that are super important, kill Delvers.
Yeah. Oh, hopefully we see a sweet game this time too. Ooh, Blazing Volley.
Wow. That's a nice card.
Yeah, I knew you would appreciate that one. Unplayable in Booster Draft main decks.
Yeah.
But very good versus Baleful Strix armies. Not so good versus
Young Peasy.
Yeah. Lingering Souls, technically.
Yeah, Lingering Souls. Bring back the souls.
So, Bob knows everything that's going on. There's no removal for Tim yet. So, I'm interested to see what happens. I think you just have to start nugging yourself for 3.
Yeah, I would, for sure. It seems like since you have 2 fetch lands, you can almost afford to just play one. But at the same time, it's kind of free to just play C.
I think Bob realizes, looking at his opponent's hand, that he just wants to get this threat out ASAP to try to kill him. Because the longer the game goes, the more it doesn't favor Bob, I think.
Yeah, I tend to agree. All right, so interesting play here from Tim, actually deciding to leave up the Spell Pierce and not play Deathrite. If I were him, I would have definitely just played like the Deathrite Shaman, mostly because Bob knows that you have the Spell Pierce in your hand. He just looked at your hand with Probe. There's not too much, that you're going to get out of keeping the Spell Pierce in your hand.
Yep, I think Bob's just going to play the Delver now.
Yeah.
So, what the heck is this?
You're just going to shock and play both.
Oh, right. It's a 1/1 Death Shadow. Yep. This is excellent play by Bob. And next turn, he can even brainstorm past Spell Pierce if he really wants to.
Yeah.
Ideally, Bob draws a fetch.
Ooh.
Brainstorm in response.
Yeah, Tim deciding that he has to kind of fire off a brainstorm here because he has so many cards in his hand, and he needs more specific answers, and he doesn't really have them. It's like most of the time this play is awful, right? Like you just want to wait as long as you can for your brainstorms, get all your value.
This is the last card that he brainstormed into. That's huge.
That's probably the best possible draw. But if he plays it here, it's horrible though, right? Unless
we just Flusterstorm the Smash to Smithereens.
Yeah, unless he also leaves up a Flusterstorm or Spell Pierce. It almost... Oh, yeah. Well, you wouldn't want to play the Deathrite Shaman and the Explosive, so that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, so Tim sort of rewarded not for playing the Deathrite. And I think he might have thought about that in deciding whether to play it on turn 1 or not.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense now.
Bob doesn't have... Does Bob have Flusterstorm of his own? Because... No. Bob has no Flusterstorms.
Oh, Delver Flip. Lucky.
Yep.
With a Thoughtseize.
Oh, that is good.
Yeah, but luckily for Tim, he has both Spell Pierce and Flusterstorm.
Yep. Otherwise, it could have been a real disaster.
Yeah. Hopefully he just lets this Thoughtseize resolve. It's actually pretty redundant. He's just going to take the Brainstorm with it, likely.
Yep.
No,
Oh,
he didn't.
oh, wow.
Oh, he
Bob's going to
decided
get
to.
super reward for this because there's no way he doesn't cast Smash here now.
Yeah, the Smash is going to be insane.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you won't. I mean, maybe he thought Bob didn't have the Smash or didn't side it in. The
That was
problem is
insane.
Tim has no information on Bob's hand at any point. This
Yeah,
is the
exactly.
power of Gitaxian Probe
Yeah.
right here.
So if you're Tim here, do you just fire off a Brainstorm and look for
Yeah,
some more answers?
I think I would. I would cast Brainstorm off Volk because you have 2 Death Rights in your hand. Ooh.
So we find Leopold, Counterspell, another Death Right. So you
Yeah,
can
I
probably-
don't think those are really that good anymore.
Yeah, they all seem like pretty bad draws.
I mean, so one thing that the Death Rights can do is actually block the 1/1 Death Shadow, which is sort of entertaining.
yeah.
Oh man, getting that explosive smashed, that might be game losing.
Yeah, it really could be. Especially like his hand doesn't have very much interaction. Actually, it has none. As far
The problem is it's all stack based interaction instead of like real interaction. If that makes
exactly.
sense. That's the slight issue with counterspells. When you're behind on board, they become unbelievably bad to draw.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're on a stable board, they're very good to draw.
Ooh, the Delver's a pretty strong draw here. You can put back the Blazing Volley and maybe the Tarn. But you kind of want the Tarn at the same time, right?
I would think by this point I would put back Blazing Volley and Daze and reveal the Volley to Delver and then
And
shuffle.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Volley, like, it's very clear that Tim doesn't have a Baleful Strix in hand because we would almost only cast Baleful Strix over Death Right last turn.
Yeah. Or, yeah, for sure.
So the one downside to this play is, do you want to play around the second Engineer Explosives?
Yeah, the second E could really be a blowout if Tim were to pick it up.
And Bob hasn't seen Tim's hand for a little bit. Whoa, we're just snap shuffling? Oh, to make the thing bigger. So
yeah,
Bob is not going to play the Delver then. That is my prediction.
Ooh, I wonder what he looked at.
Yeah, we'll find out very soon, but I am also intrigued. All right.
Decides it's Delver time.
So that means the top card is not Engineered Explosives.
Yeah.
Ooh, and he draws another Delver. All right. Well, are there any creatures in graveyards?
Looks
I don't believe
like,
so.
oh, that's just lethal.
Wow.
Just
Bob's-
straight up lethal.
Bob Huang is going to end up with a turn 5 kill.
Yeah, that's insane.
I mean, Shadow is really good at closing the game if it doesn't get disrupted at all.
Yeah,
Which
for
is basically
sure.
what happened here.
I'm a little surprised not to see the jump block from Tim. I guess he was just hoping he'd draw like an answer.
Yeah.
Because if you chump, you have so many more turns. You just play Leovold, Death
Yeah.
Right the next turn.
If we chump, we're at 7 instead, facing a flip Delver and unflip Delver, which buys you another turn to find explosives. And
Yeah,
explosives is basically the only card that matters.
Yeah, exactly.
Street Wraith. So I think Tim's hoping that Bob does something unnecessary.
Disconnects. Gets to attack with Delver.
Oh, Bob cycles Street Wraith into Leopold. That's funny.
That is pretty funny.
Yeah, Leopold does make the game really weird, but Bob is just going to attack anyways, so I don't think it really matters that much. But that is a funny interaction. Do not cycle Street Wraith with Leovold in play unless if it's your opponent's turn.
Oh wow! It actually put a creature in the graveyard, so now he's not dead.
Yes. Yes, actually that is huge. That is huge. Wait, do we have another source?
That's insane. If he draws EE, he's back in the game. Or he could even draw Ponder into EE.
Wait. There's a problem. The only green source left in his deck is Bayou.
Oh wow!
Wow. The Trop being in play actually sort of messed him up.
Wow. That was insane.
Yeah, that was an insane little interaction towards the end there.
Yeah, that was a good match.
That was actually, there was a lot. I really thought the check pile would take it very easily, but the Grixis Shadow deck was very impressive in those games.
Yeah, it really was.
All right, so that completes our bracket. We have the best of five quarterfinals next week is going to happen. In the upper right, we have Brett versus Michael Bond. We have me and Julian in the lower right. Upper left, we have Mac Doyle and Nick. And lower left, we have Caleb Durwald and Bob Huang. So that's going to be fun. It's a very different format. You have to pick through 3 decks.
Ooh, that sounds great.
Yeah, I'm going to go into the tank for a while. There's a lot of metagaming you can go on with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It'll be exciting to see what decks people decide to show up with.
Yeah, I'm still like 70% to pick lands as one of them, and I don't really care.
Yeah, it makes sense. I wouldn't blame you for that. I'd probably definitely choose Grixis as one of my decks.
Yeah, definitely. I think the deck got a lot better, actually.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to play it more now.
Okay, we'd like to thank Card Hoarder for lending out cards and also for sponsoring Noah Walker throughout all of his events, and also Living Cards for also being a great sponsor, as well as Matt Sater, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, for being a generous donor and host.
Ooh.